Hey, if you want access to the transcripts, the show notes, and the links talked about as part of this episode, you can head to Seven. So the word all spelled out, SEVEN health.com/331. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. I'm a nutritionist and a coach and an eating disorder expert, and I help people to fully recover. So before we get started with today's show, I just want to announce that I'm currently taking on new clients. If you are living with an eating disorder and would like to fully recover, and it doesn't matter how long this has been going on, whether it's a year, whether it's multiple decades, I would love to help. And I know the idea of full recovery can feel very far off and feel hard to even get in contact with, but I truly believe that everyone can reach a place of full recovery, and I would love to help you be able to achieve that. So if you're interested, you can send an email to info@7-health.com. And if you just put coaching in the subject line, I can then send over the details to you. Okay, so on with today's show. Today it is a guest interview, and my guest today is Sam Previte. And so Sam is a registered dietitian, a certified counselor, a certified personal trainer, and the founder of Find Food Freedom. She's also a lover of all things media, hosting the Find Food Freedom podcast, co-hosting the What the Actual Fork podcast, and featuring in many segments, including NBC News, CBS Morning, and The Drew Barrymore Show. She earned her Bachelor's of Science at Penn State University and then went to Adigo Health in Pittsburgh, PA to earn her RD credentials. After completing traditional schooling, she went on to gain additional certifications in intuitive eating and body image, which is where she found her true passion and Find Food Freedom was born. Find Food Freedom is a virtual private practice made up of a team of intuitive eating professionals dedicated to their mission of helping humans make peace with food and their body. Find Food Freedom is a fierce team of women who are committed to bettering the lives of everyone they reach. Sam spent many of her teenage years and into her early 20s trapped in diet culture, thinking that her life's mission was to chase a smaller body. Overcoming years of disordered eating made her realize that you can't hate your way to happiness. She feels grateful to share her story paired with education to help others find food freedom and enjoy life again. So I've been following Sam for a while now. I'm not sure exactly at what point I found her podcast, the What the Actual Fork podcast, and then found her Instagram, but I always love the content that she puts out. I love the way that she does it. She's definitely got her own style. She can be very funny with things. She's great. And so I wanted her to come on the show and for us to have this conversation. And so we talk about her challenges with food and her discovering intuitive eating and how this not only changed her own relationship with food, but the trajectory of her practice. And we talk about some of the different ways that went with her in terms of discovering intuitive eating and how she was then able to bring that into how she was helping herself and others, and that it wasn't the smoothest of journeys, but that's just often what happens with this. We then just hit on lots of just different topics. So we talk about physical restriction and mental restriction, what to do when people mention dieting when you're trying to recover. And I know this comes up a lot for people with colleagues at work or going to this family thing. We talk about the parallels and differences between peace with food and peace with movement. Sam shares a really great analogy for how food can become normalized and what that looks like. We talk about food satisfaction and what this means in real life, because I think we can have this idea of what this means, but I think it's a lot broader than what a lot of people think it is. We talk about tools for dealing with body image and managing expectations with this, and dealing with when people make comments about your body. And Sam actually shares a personal experience on this and how she was able to handle it. So this is a wide-ranging conversation. It was very easy to chat with Sam. It's very evident she has her own podcast because it was a very great, easy, flowing conversation. So without further delay, here is my conversation with Sam Previte. Hey, Sam. Welcome to Real Health Radio. I'm really glad to be chatting with you today.
I'm excited to be here.
I've gone through your podcasts I've listened to. I mean, you've got multiple podcasts, and so there's a lot that we can talk about. But I think a lot of today we'll be talking about intuitive eating and body image and just food generally. And I guess as a starting place, do you want to give listeners a bit of background on yourself? So who you are, what you do, what training you've done, that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah. So, oh gosh, the story could go on forever. So I'll try to pare it down and then you let me know where you want more detail.
For sure.
But yeah, my name is Sam Previte. I'm a registered dietitian, a certified intuitive eating counselor, a certified personal trainer, and the founder of Find Food Freedom. And Find Food Freedom is a virtual private practice made up of a team of now 14 registered dietitians and certified intuitive eating counselors. And our mission is solely to help people make peace with food in their body. And our dietitian team, we do accept insurance in the United States, and we're licensed in 22 of the states and always trying to add more. And that's been newer for us. We didn't always take insurance. We were a private pay organization for a really long time. And I found myself saying, I want to help as many people as possible.
Sure.
And then I found that the biggest objection of people being able to work with us was the cost. And I thought about myself of how, like, I always look for in-network providers first for any medical professional.
Yeah.
So it's insurance is a headache, I will say that. But it has been awesome to be able to help thousands of more people and grow an incredible team of weight inclusive providers who specialize in everything from eating disorders, disordered eating, intuitive eating, body image, PCOS, diabetes, other medical nutrition therapy related to other diseases and conditions. So that is the current day of
Yeah.
Find Food Freedom. And you'll see me more on the side of the PR, social media, working with different brands that we align with. And then, like you said, I host multiple podcasts. So we have What the Actual Fork podcasts, where I co-host with a colleague of mine, and then the Find Food Freedom podcast, which is solo hosted, where we do a lot of FAQ on intuitive eating and things that listeners kind of write in about. But I was not always a weight inclusive dietitian. I was deeply entrenched in diet culture for pretty much my entire teens and 20s.
Yeah.
And I went into the nutrition like weight centric view of wanting to find this magic answer about weight loss and how to be healthy and thin. And I was going to help other people achieve that.
Yeah.
And I remember graduating college with my nutrition degree. I also had a minor in kinesiology, which is fitness studies. And I was going off, to my dietetic program, the, continuing ed after that. And I was sitting there being like, I don't have the magic answer, but yet I now have a nutrition degree. I'm going to be a dietitian. Fast forward through my dietetic program and kind of just still had that same icky, weird feeling where it's like, well, I don't have this shit figured out. So how the heck am I going to help other people do it? And it really wasn't until I got into my first career as a dietitian. I was a retail dietitian working in supermarkets, which I absolutely loved that position because it gave me the opportunity to counsel, to do grocery store tours, to do cooking classes, to work with our community. So I got to see nutrition in all these different lenses. And I started to see patterns of people having guilt and shame, and maybe they would lose weight, but then they would gain it back. And if they overcame enough guilt and shame to come to you to be like, I need a reset, air quotes, right? Or
Yeah.
like, I was air quotes bad. And I would just see it over and over. And I was like, this is not working. Like, this is all bullshit. And I was so lucky to have a colleague of mine who was a dietetic intern with me, Haley Goodrich, who owns Inspired Nutrition. And she, back in the day, this was like before people were posting on Instagram as businesses. Now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
But she started posting about intuitive eating. She specializes in eating disorders. And I was like, what is this intuitive eating thing? And I remember calling her and being like, what is this? And so she told me to read the book. And it was like, once I read the book, I was like, oh, this is the magic answer that I've been looking for, that it's not about intentional weight loss.
Yeah.
So it kind of just like exploded my brain, and I had a lot of unlearning to do. I had a lot of relearning to do. I had a lot of biases I had to get in check. I had so much to learn, and I still do every single day. I like once I saw the intuitive eating side, I couldn't unlearn it. And I tried to fence straddle for a while, as
Yep.
Fiona Sutherland calls it. I had one foot in diet culture and one foot in intuitive eating. And I was like, oh, I can help people with both. But that did not feel good. And it basically got me to a mental breakdown. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I just went full force with Find Food Freedom and weight inclusive care. And I couldn't be happier. And I get to do what I love every day now.
Awesome. So yeah, there is more to this that I want to find out. So
Yes. So you
if
take it
we
wherever you want.
yeah, like let's go back before your teenage years. So you said like I was dieting all through my teen years. So what about like
Yeah.
you as a kid? What was food like at home and in your household?
That's a great question. So I was a very fortunate child. I mean, for those listening who can't see me, I am a white, thin, able-bodied, cisgender, heterosexual. I hold a lot of privileges that made my life fairly easy. I food wasn't like a big thing in our house. Like
Yeah,
it's interesting. My husband is Italian and like food is love. Food is everything to them.
yeah,
And I'm 50% Greek. So with my Greek family, same thing. Food is love, food is tradition, food is like the centerpiece. But with my immediate family, food wasn't really ever a thing. Like it wasn't really talked about. So it really wasn't until my high school years where I started noticing my body changing
yeah.
and just a lot of comments on my body. And then it was really more my senior year in high school and then catapulting into college where I started binge drinking and binge eating and seeing my body fluctuate and seeing people make comments about it getting bigger or smaller where I was very like hyper aware of that.
Okay. And with, like you said, you went and you studied as an RD and you obviously went and did that at university. Was it really just that dieting for that last year of school that propelled you in that direction? Or before that, I was always the sciencey kid and I was
Yeah.
interested in that piece. Like, yeah, how did you end up there?
That's a really good question. So I was definitely always interested in science. Like I loved chemistry. I was like I scored very low on like the reading and like things like that. Like I was very into more of the science of things. Like
Yeah.
my favorite class in college was organic chemistry, which most people are like that was the worst, but like I really liked it. So definitely into science. And I did I was an athlete. I danced competitively. I played lacrosse. I played basketball for like all of my life up until high school, and I just got burnt out with it. So I always had a love for fitness and movement until it took a turn in a negative,
Yeah.
relationship with dieting and feeling like I had to burn my calories and earn my food and all of that. So I definitely had a inkling for it. And my other best friend was critically injured and put into a coma, and I was supposed to be in that car.
Wow.
And still best friends with my girlfriend who survived today. And that, like, when I really think back to that time in my life, that is what catapulted disordered eating, not from a place of like restricting binging, but turning to food as a coping mechanism and
Yeah.
binging on food to cope. But like, I only now know that again now because I can look back at that time and remember things. But in that moment, like, nobody knew that was going on. I didn't know I was doing that. But I remember just like coming home and really like binging on things and feeling out of control. And
Yeah.
I was so fortunate to have food as, I had food security, I had easy access to food. And so, like many teens and children I see, they use food as a coping mechanism if they have access to it. So that kind of catapulted my body changing.
Yeah.
And then I went to college shortly thereafter because my friend passed that spring of our senior year of high school. So, and then again, I go into college so like grieving and like, this very traumatic incident just happened to me.
Yeah.
So that really like catapulted. So it wasn't even like from the root of necessarily like trying to restrict or lose weight. But then once the body changed and I noticed that, then that kind of started some more of the disordered stuff.
Okay. And man, that's a lot to go through as a high
Hmm.
school kid. With the dieting, and you obviously talked about the binges as a way of coping. had the dieting already started by that stage?
It's a good question. My beliefs at that time were like thinner was better, smaller was better. I'm a millennial, so we grew up with 17 magazine, MTV, TRL, like Cosmo, like you were reading about Jennifer Aniston's diets, right? So like
Yeah,
that to me, it wasn't necessarily like I was trying to diet, but I looked up to that and I looked
yeah,
up to this beauty standard. But again,
sure.
I'd always really lived in a thin body and had
Yeah.
been praised for that. So it wasn't until I started gaining weight and not feeling comfortable and not feeling like I held this standard that then I started those disordered behaviors.
Okay, sure. And look, the part of the reason I'm asking is for the clients that I work with and how I see so much of the eating disorders, disordered eating, etc.
Hmm.
So often what predates it is restriction. And
Yeah.
so the person who then ends up coping with food, there is restriction that predated it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
So that makes
so,
sense. It wasn't necessarily like the physical restriction, but more that mental restriction of
yeah,
like, I should be eating these healthier things. These things are air quotes better, right? These are more nutritious. These will make me a better human being, all those kind of internal beliefs for
yeah,
sure.
for sure. Which then for so many people seems counterintuitive of like, hey, if I really care about these healthy foods and good foods, air quotes, that I would then be not coping in that way. I wouldn't be turning
Yeah,
to food as my way of self-soothing and dealing with the grief. And
totally.
it becomes this is the thing I most fear or I'm most trying to control, and it ends up being the thing that I then use in those moments.
Yes, which then perpetuates a lot of guilt and shame, right?
Yeah,
Because you're going totally against those beliefs that you have.
yeah. And so let's fast forward to the point at which you then found intuitive eating. And you said you
Hmm.
read that book and it sounded like it was fairly eye-opening. And it sounded like from the moment you read it, like you were all bought in. But is that actually what happened? Or like, hey, it took me a while to get on board with this.
Yeah, great question. So I definitely had this light bulb moment. Like I can remember where I was when I called Haley and was like, oh my gosh, and all of these things. But heck no, it took many, many years because it's like, oh, okay, well, I could help people in this way, but maybe I could help people lose weight like morally and ethically, whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
And so during this time where I was exposed to intuitive eating, that was the same year that I moved from New Jersey to Florida, where I
Yeah.
currently live. And I started working in a private practice and started really ramping up counseling. And that's where it mimicked like what I told you before, what I was seeing when I was counseling in New Jersey, where like people would have this shame and guilt. They would, lose weight, gain weight, lose weight, gain weight, always need a reset, fix me, blah, blah, blah. And it just felt really icky. And so I was on a beach walk one day. I can remember this specifically, and I heard Christy Harrison's podcast.
Yep.
At the time, it was called Food Psych, and I just couldn't stop talking about it. I couldn't stop listening to episodes. I just couldn't stop taking in all this information. And I was like, I have to do this. And I slowly started to integrate what I was learning into my practice, but it really took about 3 years. It wasn't until end of 2019, 2020, so almost four, let's say, where I got to that breaking point of I can't do this anymore because people would come to me and say like I want to lose weight and I wouldn't say yes, but I wouldn't say no. I would say like, well, let's talk and see. And I would almost try to like convince them to do intuitive eating.
Yeah.
And that was so exhausting
Yeah.
because that's not what it's about, right?
Yeah.
It's not about convincing people. So it was more so after I went to a seminar with Haley Goodrich and Fiona Sutherland, and Christy Harrison was there. And it was like after the seminar, I was like bawling to my mentors, and I was like, I have to do this. Like, I can't do this anymore. And Christy Harrison walked up and she was like my idol at the time. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, I was like meeting her and crying. Anyways, long story short, it was then that I said, I can't do this anymore. And at the time, I was working with someone else in private practice, and she just had different beliefs than I did. She thought
Yeah.
that you could teach intuitive eating and intentional weight loss. And so it was really hard for me because I had been a people pleaser and all these other things that I was like, okay, well, I don't believe that. So like we have to just cut ties here. Still have so much respect for her and the work that she does, but it's just not doesn't align with me. So
Yeah.
it was in August of 2020 that everything really went like full force, weight inclusive, intuitive eating. And I was scared because as a dietitian, we've been taught that weight loss is our party trick. And when you tell someone you're a dietitian, they tell you what they eat and ask you how to lose weight. So I was like, how the hell am I going to make a living off this when nobody wants to do this?
Yeah.
And so that was probably one of the things that was holding me back the longest too, of like, I'm just going to fail because everybody just wants to lose weight. But I can confidently say that is not the case today.
No, and I guess you got into this at the time when intuitive eating sort of hit the mainstream and became
Yes,
a lot more aware by the wider public. Um,
absolutely.
and so that definitely helped. But what about your own journey with this? Because obviously you said, okay, took me 3-ish years to transition into doing this within my practice. But what about for you, like someone who'd been dieting, who'd been in that place? What was your personal journey with it like over those years?
Yeah, it was funny when I read the intuitive eating book. I think there was this part of me, like by that point of where I was at, I had already rejected diet culture, like that first principle of just not dieting anymore. I
Yeah,
definitely wasn't doing intuitive eating, but I just hadn't dieted anymore. I was more in that rebellion stage of just like, fuck it, I'm gonna eat everything and anything. I'm never going back to dieting.
yeah,
And then as I it's funny when because I've been asked this question before. Like I never really went through this, I'm gonna work on a workbook and I'm gonna do this, principle and blah blah blah. It was
yeah,
more like as I was taking in all of the podcasts and learning from a professional lens, it was just having this ripple effect on my personal where I
yeah,
was soaking it all in and again like my belief systems were changing. So then I was able to take what I was learning professionally and apply it personally.
yeah,
Definitely I've gone to a therapist for 4 years, so definitely did some talk therapy in there and she's a certified intuitive eating counselor. That was very important to me to find a counselor who was, body positive, weight inclusive and understood the work I did. So
yeah,
that was helpful. But it really was just by implementing it in my professional life that it made it easier to implement into my personal life. And I also just I want to stress to those listening, like again, I live in a straight size body, so I think for me it becomes a lot easier of a process because I don't have the discrimination, the shaming, the oppression that those who reside in larger bodies get every day for simply existing. Doesn't mean I didn't have body image issues. Doesn't mean I didn't struggle. But it's easier for me to show up in this world. And so I think I say fortunately that helped me, but unfortunately, like knowing the clients that we work with and support, that's just not the case. Like it's very, very hard for those who are constantly getting told that their body's the problem, their
yeah.
body's the root of all their issues. So that's just something I want to stress as well.
Yeah, for sure. And was there, like, it sounds as though your journey was fairly easy, and I know easy is a relative term,
Yeah.
but fairly easy in comparison to a lot of your clients. Were there any snags or sticking points, or like, okay, this bit was the bit that I felt was the most challenging for me to get over?
That's a good question. I feel like for me, it was more my identity as a dietitian
Yeah,
wrapped up in the worlds of diet culture and intuitive eating, because especially for what I do for a living, right? A lot of my work is online and being present on social media. And so, as somebody who is an intuitive eating dietitian, a weight inclusive dietitian, like people just assume that dietitians eat fruits and vegetables all day and like count their calories and do all these things. And so it was
yeah,
like you're constantly getting this narrative from other people and people just assuming things about you.
yeah,
And so pushing back against that and then people finding out what I do be like, you're promoting Osler, air quotes, obesity, all of these like weird messages from the outside were probably the hardest because I was trying to do this professional huge switch. I was, transitioning my own relationship with food and body. And so to have like all of these outside voices looking in,
Yeah.
and I mean, people do not hold back on the internet, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
So that was hard to navigate, but got some really great advice from Evelyn Tribole, the one of the founders of intuitive eating, of, if people aren't reachable or aren't teachable, don't waste your mental energy thinking about them and
Yeah.
trying to convince them. And then also from a like a work perspective, I think I was really impacted by like negativity for a really long time on the internet. And there was Evelyn who had talked to me to say, like, find your core unit of people who you trust and you want their feedback. For example, if Evelyn Tribole came to me and said, hey, that piece of content you just put out, like, it didn't land well, it could be really offensive, blah, blah, like, I'm going to take that to heart.
Yeah.
But if Joe Schmo 12345 with no profile picture tells me I'm a fucking idiot and blah, 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 which I get all the time, that's just gonna like go right off of me. And
Yeah.
so I think that was really hard to navigate, like making peace with food and body, doing this huge professional switch, and having all these outside voices like telling me that I was wrong or I was gonna fail or I was, a problem, whatever. So
Yeah.
that was hard, my own intuition for
Yeah.
myself and just professionally as well.
Yeah. And I think the getting better with receiving comments from the public, I think part of it, at least when I reflect on me, it just took time. It took
Yeah.
time
You,
for me
you
to
unfortunately have to get used to it, which is
yeah.
so fucked up because it's like we shouldn't have to get used to this, but we do.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I remember once like years and years and years ago, some comments on my on like a blog post or whatever, and it would like destroy me for a couple
Yeah,
of days and I wouldn't sleep and I would feel so bad about it all. And now it's just, what, it's not that there's nothing that phases me. Like there can be times where
of
something will,
course.
but in the whole scheme of things, yeah, it doesn't bother me the way that it used to before, and I can come back to all of the wonderful comments that I
That's
receive
what I
for
was
all the
gonna
work that I
say.
do with people and be like, no, people have told me on many occasions like I've saved their life or this has changed the trajectory of their life. I'm like, okay, this is actually very helpful for people.
Exactly. But it's so easy with our human brains to focus on the negative.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, for like, you probably get way more positive comments than you do negative,
Yes.
unless your video ends up on the wrong side of TikTok, which I can promise you. Then you just get thousands of negative comments. But that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, for sure. And what about in your actual real life? Because it's
Mhm.
one thing to receive hurtful comments online. It's another when, hey, this best friend of mine or my mom or I whatever is now questioning the direction I'm taking with this. So is there any of that with the way that you're doing it?
Oh, for sure. I would say more with my immediate like loved ones, no, but like with extended family, aunts, uncles, I mean, you think about the people in your life that are entrenched in diet culture, right? Or even
Yeah.
like girlfriends. And I still have that where like I have very close friends that we'll go to dinner and they'll be like, Sammy, close your ears. And then they'll say something. And it's like that used to bother me. But now, again, I'm at this place where like everyone has body autonomy. I'm not here to convince or defend anything or, like
Yeah.
tell people what they need to do. So now it's so much easier. But
Yeah.
again, in the beginning, when you're doing this huge, it wasn't even just a shift of like, my relationship with food, my relationship with my body, my business, but it's like your belief systems, right? Like your
Totally.
internal belief systems. So that at that time I was so fragile with other people's thoughts because it's like, well, am I doing the right, But now I'm so grounded in the work that I do and the beliefs that I have that it really takes a lot to rile me up or, to strike a nerve or but in the past definitely I would like fight with family members at like holiday events but then you leave that just feeling like more discouraged and
Yeah.
defeated and then I would and again back to what Evelyn said, if they're not reachable or teachable, it's you close up shop. They're not curious, they don't want to learn, so don't waste your mental energy.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing that you said about your beliefs is so true because I think
Hmm.
where people get really triggered by things and really struggle, it so often is about the confirmation bias. and is
Hmm.
about the things that are still what you're doing, someone can say, I think this is wrong. And it doesn't, again, it doesn't phase you in the same way because you feel fairly solid in what you're doing.
Yes. And I think like I just released myself of the responsibility
Yeah.
of convincing people to do this. Because I think when you come to this work and you have this revelation, right? Like I don't know about you, but like when I found this work, you want to just scream it from the rooftops. You want to tell everybody, you want to like shake them and be like, how did we know about this? Right? You see diet culture everywhere and you're like
Yeah.
so revved up. But then that leads to burnout pretty
Yeah.
quickly, as I learned. And then once you can step back and be like, oh, it's not my responsibility to convince people. And
Yeah.
I would just, and you can just sit back and it's like, oh, this is how we stay in it for the long game.
Yeah.
So again, it took years to learn that. Still don't get it perfect for sure. Can promise that, but it's a lot easier as time goes on.
For sure. And I think when I think about it through that lens as well, it gives you compassion for other people who have recently discovered keto. For them in that moment, it's working
Yes.
amazingly, and
Yep.
they're becoming really evangelical about it and want to tell every human on the planet that this is what everyone needs to do. Like
Yes.
it makes sense. And so
Yes.
rather than like, hey, now we need to be at loggerheads, it's like, okay, you do you. I'm not in a position where I'm going to be able to reach you with this, and that's fine. I
Yes,
want to talk to the
totally.
people who actually want my services or want to be actually helped in this area.
I love that point you bring up. And that's something with so many clients around like the holidays, right? Where they're gearing up for those events where they know their Aunt Susan's going to talk about the
Yeah,
keto diet or whatever. And we have those exact conversations to be like, hey, hold up. Let's remember that used to be us, right? Like we
yeah,
used to be the one at the events talking about the diet or the calorie counting or whatever. So it's funny how it like, I've not funny, that's not the right word, but it's interesting how it goes from like rage and like anger when people are doing that when you first find out to then that compassion and that empathy of, oh, that used to be me.
yeah,
And even like you said, it could be you when you figure out about intuitive eating, but just even 99.9% of the people I feel like that come to intuitive eating were chronic dieters, right? Or had
yeah.
clinical diagnosed eating disorder. So intuitive eating is just eating if diet culture didn't exist, but the majority of us have been on diets our whole lives and used to shout it from the rooftops when we found our new magical diet. So it's that same thing.
Yeah. And I talk about the same journey that people go through in terms of that transition as they work through recovery and notice things
Hmm.
change. That in the beginning, hearing about Aunt Susie's diet can be super triggering and there can be a lot
Hmm.
of rage of like it's unfair, you get to do this and I don't. And then
Hmm.
at some point there is this compassion piece and the realization of, man, I probably triggered quite a few people by my behaviors and by my talking about certain things. And then there's also the realization of like, thank fuck, that is not me anymore. Like, I'm so glad
Yep.
I'm on the other side of this thing. And that, yeah, this is not how I live my life. And I say this because when you're at the early stages, it doesn't feel like that's ever going to be true. Like, it
Yes.
feels like I'm having to, I don't know, choose celibacy and this sucks and it's always going to suck and it's going to be horrendous for the rest of my life and everyone else gets to go off and do all these fun things and
Hmm.
that's just not true in the end there is a point where you're like I'm so glad that's not me.
Yes. And I think it's important, these conversations. It's so funny talking to another professional about this. Like, to us, it's like, yeah, like this is what you go through. But sometimes I need to have these conversations to realize like how important it is to level set those expectations for people. So then when they go through the angry phase, right? Or when they go through those phases, it's like, oh yeah, you told me about this. But like
Yeah,
we're just so used to it that you forget like how important that is to show people what those expectations are. And not that everybody's journey is the exact same, of course, but I think when you're going from tangible numbers and measurements and weight and calories of diet culture and then you come over to recovery, it's like people feel like they're flailing. So I think giving those expectations in those stages is really helpful.
yeah, for sure. And I know I think you had either a post on it or a podcast on it of ways to respond when people start talking about diet culture,
Hmm.
an event or whatever, like, do you want to share some of this? Because this is one of those questions I get all the time from clients. Like, well, what do I do? Someone's bringing this up at work. How do I handle this? So what advice do you give in this area?
This is a great question. I feel like we could go 20 different ways with this. So, my first disclaimer is always that it's going to be different for every person, depending on the mood that you're in, right? The
Yeah.
setting that you're in, what other people are around, who you're talking to. Is it your boss? Is it your partner, right? Like, there's so many different factors to this. But I think the first thing that I'll repeat, I feel like I've said it probably 3 times now, that I always kind of start with is, are they reachable? Are they teachable? So let's just give an example. You're in the break room, it's a pizza party at work, and Sharon is in the corner talking about how she doesn't eat pizza because carbs are bad and she doesn't, blah, blah, blah. You can already kind of tell from her tone, she doesn't want to hear about intuitive eating. She
Yeah.
doesn't care, right? Like, so in that sense, I usually will tell people, like, if you want to, you can just say nothing. You don't have to respond, right? You don't have to say anything. And now some, and again, this is where everyone's personality is different. Because I'll have clients be like, well, then I feel like I'm not standing up. And again, it totally depends on the person. So
Yeah.
you can say nothing, protect your mental energy. You can redirect. So you could respond to Sharon and be like, that's awesome. Hey, did I show you the picture of my French bulldog I took the other day? It's so cute, blah, blah, blah. Like, just totally redirect,
Yeah.
right? And you could have a couple things in your back pocket for when these kind of comments come up, where it's like, hey, did you watch the season finale of Severance? It was so good. What did you think, right? Like, so you just have these little tidbits in your head where you're going to go and you're just going to completely take charge of the conversation.
I was
And
we were
then
talking about this. I'm like, oh, it's like a politician when they ask the question, they're like, I'm going to answer the question that I wanted to be asked, and I'll just tell you
exactly.
the answer to that question.
Yes. So you just know in your heart, in your soul, in your body that you're not going to engage in this type of conversation. So you get to choose. Depending on the situation, like I said before, where it's like you don't respond, you could also just do like good old fake phone call, right? Like nowadays, no one's iPhone is ringing. Who keeps their iPhone on ring, right? So you can just look down like, oh, shit, I got to take this call. I'll be right back. Just walk out of the damn room, pretend like you're on a phone call. Boom, you're out. There's like so many different ways. So basically, it's like acting school is what we're going through right now. And then the last one, though, and this, it could be so many different ways of setting a boundary with that person of like, if you feel like they've done it over and over and over, and it's very triggering and it's very hurtful, and you feel like it is right to stand up for yourself, then that's important to do so. So maybe it's saying to Sharon, hey, it's really triggering for me to talk about food and calories. I'd really appreciate it if we don't talk about that. But I would, and then again, I think the redirection helps here. If you want to pull it away and redirect it, you can. If you want to stop firm in your boundary, that can be scary sometimes. I think sometimes speaking up for ourselves, it can be hard, but I do think it's really important in some situations, especially with like loved ones that you're going to see over and over and over and over again,
Yeah.
because there comes a point where it's like, is it worth it? Like, how much are they triggering you in your recovery for a time being? That doesn't mean you can never be around them, but maybe we need to pull back and have some physical boundaries for safety. So those are kind of the ones I go through, but I always just love the not speaking back to them. Sometimes I just stare at my family members now. It's actually funny. Like my husband will laugh because I'm just like, I just don't say anything because they obviously know what I do for a living. They see my videos or the redirection. The redirection always works. It's a good
Yeah,
one.
sure. Well, the other one I was just going to add, and it kind of
Yeah.
sits with everything you said, is for some people doing this in person is really hard. So there's
Yes.
nothing wrong with, you know what, you leave the break room and you compose an email. And
I
that
love
way that
that.
gives you as much time as you want to put it in the exact words that you want to say or put it in a text message so
Yep.
that you feel, okay, cool, I've laid it out the way that I want to do. Because I think just chatting with you, you seem like someone who's good on your feet, pretty good in a conversation, feels pretty strongly about certain things, and this isn't going to be too big a deal. I know there will be some
Of
sensitive things,
course.
but yeah, I get your nature
I've
is
had some practice
you've
at it
had some
too,
practice. Yeah.
right? That's the huge part. The first time doing this, I remember the flush in my face and the increased heartbeat and the sweaty hands. Like it's hard to stick up for yourself and to set boundaries. As a recovering people pleaser, it is something I still am working on. So totally love that idea of putting it in writing too.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, what I think would be useful is like going through some of the principles of intuitive eating and just having a bit of a conversation around it. And look, I know
Mhm.
what is in the intuitive eating book. I know what's in the workbook. So if there's stuff that you're like, you know what, I do this thing a little differently, or I always focus it on in this way or whatever, like I'd love to hear sort of your take on it or your spin on it.
Hmm.
I mean,
I
we
think
can go, we can work our way through the principles, or you can be just like, hey, this thing comes to mind and just start.
yeah. I think one parallel that I love to talk about often is when we're looking at making peace with food and
Yeah,
making peace with movement,
yeah,
those parallel journeys are so important to recognize of the fears that come up. So, for example, when we're trying to make peace with food, we have to have unconditional permission to eat.
yeah,
Now, most people, when they hear that on social media, they think, so you're telling people they should eat pizza all day, every day. Da, 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 da." No, that's not what I said. I said that they should have unconditional permission to eat these foods without guilt or shame.
yeah,
Now, that first fear that comes up for our clients, rightfully so, is I am never going to stop eating those foods if you give me unconditional permission to them. And
yeah,
that makes sense, right? Because when they have gone through these dieting cycles, there was restriction.
yeah,
So I always say the bow and arrow, right? We pull back that bow, restrict, 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 and then we let go and say, fuck it, I can't do this anymore. The arrow flies further in the opposite direction. We binge on everything. And that creates this false evidence in our head that, see, this is why I have to have restriction because I'm out of control. Meanwhile, that restriction is what is causing the out of control, right?
yeah,
So it's so normal to have that fear when you're on an intuitive eating journey and starting to have that unconditional permission to eat because you fear you think of those binges and you think I'm always going to be out of control. But the more we expose ourselves to those foods, the less scary they become and the
yeah,
more they just become neutral. And then we get to explore food, and that's where it becomes fun of what do I actually want and satisfaction and hunger and all of those things. But I find this parallel with our relationship with movement. When we look at the principle, I'm like, what number is it? Nine is
yeah,
movement, feel the difference, where we have to have unconditional permission to rest
yeah,
in order to make peace with movement. And it's that same fear that comes up. But Sam, if you tell me that I have unconditional permission to rest, I will never move my body again.
yeah,
And it's thinking about those times that maybe we're militantly working out and then we step away from it and then we got out of our routine and it took forever to get back to movement because we were moving for reasons, right? The intention behind the movement was to burn calories, to punish all of these things. So it is so important in order to make peace with movement, we have to know that we are allowed to rest unconditionally whenever we want. And that is where the magic happens of where then we start to say, huh, I'm craving movement, but what kind of movement? I don't even know what I like. Like, what do I like? And the same thing happens with food. Huh, I'm eating all of this pizza or cake or cookies, and I'm noticing that I want other things. Like, what do I actually like? And it's so interesting to see those. And usually I find with clients that I work with, we're working through making peace with food first.
yeah,
And later on in their journey, movement comes up. And it's really cool. I feel like they're able to make peace with movement almost quicker. Not always, of course, everybody's different, but because they've lived through that with food and have able to have a peaceful relationship with food, they're like, oh, I'm doing the exact same thing with movement, aren't I? So I think that that parallel is really cool.
Okay, nice. I guess to respond to a couple of those things, I think on the food piece, I agree. Like everyone feels like, oh wow, if I just open the floodgates, like it is never gonna stop.
Yep.
And the reality is this is just a novelty thing. You've created
Hmm.
this high amount of novelty for these foods because they've been off limits. I only rarely get them, or the times that I get them, or the times that I binge, or anytime I have them, there's this huge excitement added to them. Like it's just
Hmm.
disproportional to the actual food. And I don't care about how much we're talking about that these foods have been created in a lab and they're so tasty and you just can't stop and all of that. It's still just about you haven't been doing this enough. Like find the most delicious, amazing food, have it every meal. Do that day after day after day. By day three, by day four, I don't know how many days it's going to take you, but the food that you think you can never ever stop, it after a while, you're like, I don't want to see pizza again for a while. I
Yes.
remember I was listening to a podcast with it was a golfing podcast, and it was a dad talking about the fact that the wife was away and he had the kids for 5 days or 7 days or whatever. So he's like, we're gonna go to all of the best burger spots around where I live. And he's like, by day five, they're like, Dad, can we just not go and get burgers? But it took them
Food
5 days to be like, I'm just
habituation.
done with this. I don't want a burger anymore. And I think that that's true for everyone. And maybe for other people, it takes a longer amount of time because of the restriction and all of the things that are built up around that. But no matter who you are or how long this has been going on, at some point it becomes tiresome. That food that you think is amazing is going to become just another piece of food.
Yes. I love that point that you made. First of all, when you were telling that story about the golfing podcast, I'm like, well, why doesn't golf habituate for my husband? Why can he just golf every single day and never get sick of it? But that's, I guess, because it's a hobby and it's something he loves, right? I wish
Yeah.
it could habituate. Um,
I need to
I
play
joke.
golf with your husband then.
Yes, come on over. But one analogy you made me think of, and you may have heard this, Evelyn Tribole taught this through her certification is like saying I love you. So, Chris, do you have a partner?
Yes. Yeah, I've got a
Okay.
wife and a
Okay.
kid.
Okay. So the who said I love you first? You or your wife? Do you remember?
I think it was me, but I can't remember. Like that's probably quite sad. But
That's okay.
I
Well,
can't remember.
absolutely. But you think about like those first couple times of either you saying it or her saying it and hearing it, like what came up in your body. And it might be hard in this example if you don't remember it, but what do you think
Oh,
happened
I
in
can
those
still
first
like
couple
even
times?
if I can't remember that exact moment, you can
Hmm.
still remember those early moments where it's like, oh
Yes.
wow, like this is so intense. This is so wonderful. Like I can't believe that this human is saying this to me. I want to,
Yep.
man, I will never grow tired of hearing this.
Yes. And you probably had like physical things come up, right?
Yeah.
Whether it was like face flushing, heart beating fast, hands sweating, all those things.
Yeah.
Now, how does it feel when you hear I love you from your wife?
It feels okay.
Right? It's
It's
just a part of
lovely, but
life.
it's like it's pretty normalized by
Yeah,
now after whatever 13 years, 14 years, whatever it is.
exactly. Right? You're on the phone. Okay, love you. Bye. Click, right?
Yeah.
And it's not that it's bad. It's not that you don't like it, but
Yeah.
it's normalized.
Yeah.
And that's I love that analogy that Evelyn like kind of gives with food of like when we have these foods that we put on this pedestal, it's exciting, right? It's like lustful. It's, oh my gosh, like pizza, I can't have that. And then when we can have pizza whenever we want, it's just pizza. It's not that we want to ruin pizza and not like it and make it bad in
Yeah.
any way, shape, or form, right? But we want it to be just pizza
Yeah.
pizza that we can enjoy, right? And so the more back to the examples you gave of the more you normalize it and have exposure to it, it becomes neutral. And it's interesting how through like we talked about expectations earlier, how through an intuitive eating journey, once you make food neutral, it
Yeah.
can be kind of boring. And that's something not everyone experiences, but a lot of my clients are like, I just don't care about food anymore because it's not this like lustful thing that I can't have. So a big part of going through that is like, okay, well, let's find foods that we do like. Let's find flavors and textures and mouth feels and temperatures and things that make food fun again because it can be difficult when it's like not lustful anymore
For sure.
sometimes, right? And it's
Yeah.
it's it's so interesting how that happens.
Yeah. They can definitely become this disappointment of like
Yep.
this used to be something that was really exciting. And yes, it was fraught
Hmm.
and there were all these other things connected to it, but I kind of I miss that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then just in terms of the exercise piece, I 100% agree with what you
Hmm.
said. And for the work that I'm doing at this point in the clients I'm seeing, really I'm encouraging people to take a break from exercise
Yeah.
because as you said, it's so hard to change that relationship if you don't have the ability to actually rest because you're not then actually able to decide what do I truly want because we've we've
Yes.
we've already removed the option of rest. So we're not even able to pick that. And we actually need to be
Yes.
able to bring that back in to then be able to say, okay, what do we want in terms of movement or no movement or stillness or whatever it may be. And so I think that's important. And what I found for people, even if this is one of the first things we've changed, is that it's one, people's biggest fear more than anything else is stopping moving. And two, on average, it is the thing that improves the quickest. And so I
Yes.
know you said, oh, I'm doing it later. And so they've had this practice and that's why it gets easier. I don't know if that's actually true. I think there's just something different about when you physically rest, you you acclimatize to that quicker than the food piece. And I don't know if that's because we're having something where there's no gray area. Like
Mm,
you're resting. When we're not going to the gym a little bit. And if you're doing the
yeah.
gym a little bit, then it's really hard. But with the food piece, you're always doing food in some form or fashion. And so
That's a
there
really
isn't
great point.
this real break. And so I think in terms of the exposure therapy element of it, people get exposed to the stillness a lot quicker. And so yeah, within a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we've got on board with that a lot quicker and way quicker than people expect to have that change.
I love that. Thank you for saying that. And I that's a really interesting point because yeah, we have to eat multiple times a day and there's so many different ways that we're being exposed to food therapy, but again with that rest, it's yeah, that's a great point that you bring up. I love that.
Yeah, nice. What about some of the other principles? Is there any other things that come to mind for you?
Well, I think it might seem so simple, but I think that asking people, what do you like to eat? Like baffles them. Like the amount of times I've had people stare at me and be like, I have no fucking clue. Because when you come from dieting, you're making your food choices based on external influences, right? You're choosing it because of the calorie count or the meal plan or the portion size or the green foods versus the red foods or whatever the fuck the rules are, right? So
Yeah,
when you come into intuitive eating and it's like, what do you want to eat? Like, what do you like to eat? And especially once we make peace with food, coming to this exploration phase of satisfaction and how to choose foods based off what satisfies us can be such an incredible experience because
yeah,
I think yeah, there's no diet in the world that, and when I say diet, I simply mean an eating plan that the mission and the goal is intentional weight loss. There is no diet in the world, fad diet, that can promote satisfaction because you're always like deprivation, restriction. You're always using some sort of restriction to get your end goal. So that's what I love so much about intuitive eating is people I think sometimes just think of it as like making peace with food and making peace with your body. And that's all very important, but like you get to find out what you actually like to eat, which I'll have
yeah,
people in their 50s, 60s be like, I don't know. And I haven't known for 40 plus years what I like. And so that's a really fun thing to explore with clients.
yeah. No, and I think that the other piece connected to this is being okay with food being functional. Because I think
Hmm.
sometimes people can try and go so far the other way where everything needs to be just so satisfying and I got to get this thing perfectly and that thing perfectly. And
Great
there's
point.
real importance to that, and I want to have those experiences so someone can really understand all the things that make a difference. And we live in a world where, you know what, you may have 5 minutes between a meeting where you're trying to cram a sandwich into your face, and that's all you've got. And we just need to for it to be functional. And at that point, we're getting in energy, and that's great. And then tonight, when you've got a little more time, okay, now we can prioritize satisfaction a little more. Because I think sometimes the pendulum can just swing too far in either of those
Totally.
directions.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And I'm a huge proponent on social media of sharing like convenience foods, right? Having 2 minutes to make something with
Yeah.
two little kids. That's like a whole nother podcast in and of itself. I'm sure you experienced this at some point in your parenting journey where like, I don't give a fuck what I eat. I just need to put something in my body so I have energy and
Yep.
can care for their needs, right? And so food is can absolutely be simple and convenient. It doesn't always have to be this beautifully Instagram aesthetic meal, which truly mine never are.
Yeah.
But it can be both, right? It can be convenient and satisfactory
Sure.
too. So
Yeah.
I love that you brought up that point because I never want people to feel like they have to have these beautiful crafted 5-course meals to be satisfied.
Yeah. And look, like there's definitely times, I mean, today I had a 10-minute lunch where I
Hmm.
reheated up some rice from yesterday and then added like a pouch of these bean things that we have. And I did it because
Yep.
it took me no time to do. I added
Yep.
some hummus, I added some bits to it. And was it the most delicious meal I've ever eaten? No, but I actually enjoy it. And so
Yep.
it was
Kept you
functional and it
full.
meant that I could eat really quickly and then I could come back and prepare for this. And so
Yes.
I think just giving people that idea that food, because I think the thing with intuitive eating, people get latched on to so many parts of it and think it means this thing or it means that thing, or
Hmm.
I always have to listen to my
Yes.
hunger, or I always have to do this. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like there is so much nuance within this, and we can look at this element and then that element. And yeah, sometimes we're eating when we're not hungry because we're gonna have a meeting at the point that we're gonna be eating, or we should,
Yep.
or normally are eating. So we're gonna eat earlier. Or sometimes, as I said, we've got 5 minutes, and so we just need to cram something in. And so I want to have people understand that intuitive eating is more than what people typically think of when they hear that title.
Yes, 100%. And I think going off of that vein of just food in general, like the 10th principle, right? Honor your health with gentle nutrition. It's often funny how on social I feel like people don't think that nutrition is a part of intuitive eating like
Yeah,
because we so often get those troll comments, right? Of like you're making your people unhealthy and blah blah blah. And I'm like, "No, we are registered dietitians. We have 1,400 hours of clinical supervised practice and we understand medical nutrition therapy and it's being able to myth bust and when I get that question of can I do intuitive eating if I have diabetes? Can I be an intuitive eater if I have PCOS? Like, enter any medical condition? Yes,
yeah,
absolutely yes. Because really, when you look at intuitive eating, you can integrate medical nutrition therapy without the guilt and shame. And we
yeah,
have so many studies, 170 plus, that show, improved health outcomes in so many different ways, physical, mental, emotional, implementing intuitive eating. And so I I love when people ask that or when I get it like a DM, like, I have diabetes, like, can I do an intuitive eating? I'm like, yes, we have so many clients, we've gotten their A1C down dramatically, and we are not restricting them of carbs and telling them never to eat sugar again, which we know is not the answer. So that is another one that I always love to talk about because all of us, we have, different blood levels. We have different medical diseases and conditions. We have different, genetics and maybe our parents have certain diseases and conditions that we're aware of and we want to be mindful of with our nutrition. And I think it's an important thing to think about as well.
yeah, for sure. I mean, even for me, when I think about eating disorder recovery, the thing I always say is like calories trump everything else. If you're not
Hmm.
taking enough calories,
Yep.
we can forget all of the other bits of getting lost in the weeds with this thing.
Yep.
And there are times where, okay, it does make a little more sense to pay attention to certain things. Like I'm thinking of a call I had with someone this morning, and for the first time in a very long time, I said to someone, I don't actually think you're eating enough protein. Because that is the thing that everyone does so much of, and normally I'm
I was
trying
gonna
to.
say we never have to say those words.
No, normally I'm like, okay, I think you need to go easy on the protein. You're definitely getting in your required amounts. You're not
Yep.
really eating much carbohydrates. You're not eating much fat. Like that's where we need to focus. But for this person, I said, hey, I actually think this is one of the things that is missing at the moment. And I don't want you to cut anything out to bring this thing in. I want you to be adding it on top of what you're doing. And
Yep.
I want you to do this, and we'll run that experiment and let's see what you notice from doing that. And so, yeah, I think there's layers to all of this. Like there's like,
Of
okay,
course.
these are the big things that have to be happening, and then if we're doing those right, okay, let's look at what the next layer is underneath to go into a little more detail to refine this thing. But if you're not eating enough calories, then everything else just falls by the wayside.
100%. And I think a lot of times, like people, rightfully so, if they're coming from diet culture, will come to an intuitive eating dietitian and be like, just tell me what to eat, right?
Yep.
Yeah, do it from your lens. And I'm like, well, it's not that I won't talk about nutrients or vitamins or macronutrients or those things, but I do think it's imperative to make peace with food first, right? Before
Yep.
we dive into that, because it just feels icky if we're going into macronutrients and micronutrients. And like you said, if you're not eating enough, none of that matters.
Yeah.
And the majority of the people we work with are restricting and not getting enough at some point. So, but I love to myth bust that like we are dietitians. We do love nutrition and medical nutrition therapy and can
Yep.
help with that too. And we just do it without the guilt and shame. So
Yes.
it's great.
For sure. And just that actually the things from a nutritional standpoint that make a difference can be,
Yes.
hey, you need to eat more often. You need to be eating more food.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have to get into the tiny micronutrient details
Yes.
because there's some really big obvious red flags of other things that we need to work
Yes.
on here. And I think people do it in the complete opposite direction
100%.
so often of like, tell me how much CoQ10 I should be getting in. I'm like, hey, you're not really even having lunch. Like
Tell
that
me what
that's
greens powder I should drink. Okay, how about we eat food first, right?
yes. Yes, exactly.
99.9% of us do not need a greens powder. Really, 100% of us don't. But
Yes,
again,
yes,
another conversation for another day.
for sure. So I think it'd be useful to talk about body image because I know from me this comes up a lot. I imagine it comes up a lot for you, and I don't know. I mean, I can just start a broad general question to start with, and you can just kind of go where you
Yeah.
want to. Like yeah, how do you start with body image with people, or what are some of the things that people are most struggling with where you're like, hey, I normally go in this direction?
Yeah. Great question. Well, you've been asking that is making me think back to when you were asking me about my personal story. And I find this to be true for a lot of my clients is when they get introduced to the anti-diet intuitive eating message at first, they're like, yeah, fuck dieting. Like, all foods fit. And then it's like, and then when we hear the body piece of it is like all bodies are good bodies, like trust your body. It's like, wait, no, 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 no. What?
Yeah.
And so I think
Yeah,
for a
other
lot
people
of
can do that, but I
yeah,
not for
but
me.
but not me, right? And so I think that's a really common experience I see is people like wanting to get on board with the like fuck dieting piece, but then when it comes to the body changing, it's like, well, that's where I draw the line, right?
Yeah,
And that makes sense because we live in a completely fat phobic world. Like we talked about earlier, people who reside in larger bodies have an immense amount of shame and discrimination and weight stigma done to them. We know that people that are in smaller bodies are treated more kindly, they have more opportunities. So there is so much that goes into this. But if we pull it back to where do we start with clients, it's really understanding their body image story. And I like to use the analogy of a tree of like roots, trunk, and leaves and branches. So if we're looking at those roots deep underground that are, firmly planted, those would be the primary messages that we've been given about our body.
yeah,
So we'll really work through this with a client of kind of like a flow chart. So you put your name in the middle of a page. Let's say I put Sam, and then I'm just going to shoot off all these different people, mom, dad, coaches, mentors, friends, teachers, and think about all the different comments that I heard about my body or bodies in general that have
yeah,
stuck with me and have become this like primary message and belief system that I believe about my body and bodies in general.
yeah,
Then we kind of go from there because that obviously influences our current relationship with body and
Yeah.
look at what that looks like. And then we look at, okay, what do we want our relationship with our body to look like? Like, what would a peaceful relationship with our body look like? And we kind of explore this story or this timeline. Um, and it really all comes back to belief systems about what do we believe? Where were we taught that? And how do we challenge those belief systems? Now, again, this could be like probably 5 hours of a podcast alone, right? Body image of there's
Yeah.
so much that goes into this because we have to think about the physical body. Pain and discomfort are valid. And if people are feeling that in their body, it's not about saying, oh, no, 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 like your body's a good body.
Yeah.
So understanding the difference between physical pain and emotional pain and separating those
Yeah.
and getting resources for both. And then again, coming back to just the layers of fat phobia that exist. Vinnie Wellsby is one of my favorite fat activists that we've brought on
Yeah.
multiple times to do education with our team and our clients of understanding the different levels of fat phobia, interpersonal, versus ideological, and understanding what your part can be. So I know I'm rambling and going in so many different ways, but it's body image is so deeply rooted. And I think it's truly something that our clients will always be working on. As humans, we will always be working on because our relationship with our body is the longest relationship we'll ever be in.
Yeah.
And it's the most important one. And it's always, our body's always changing. Therefore, our relationship with our body is always changing. And so, really bringing it back to self compassion and starting with why do we feel this way about our body and bodies in general?
Yeah. And I think that comment of like this will be something that is something people deal with forever. And as you say, there are a number of reasons for that. But I think one of them is when you have prioritized this thing for a really long time, this is how you get your sense of safety or your sense of control, or in a sense, your brain just keeps coming back to this whenever
Yep.
there is a threat or whenever it is stressful. And
Yep.
that's going to happen. The idea of why don't we restrict? Or gosh, it would be
Mhm.
easier if these genes weren't as tight, or whatever it may be. Like it's so automatically you don't think your thoughts think themselves. They come into your awareness, and
Yes.
when you change your state because of something occurring, so that your nervous system has log this thing as a threat, like it's amazing. Certain things just start to come off, and just
Yeah.
being able to have that awareness, to be able to notice, like, oh, isn't that interesting? And I know that sounds a lot easier said than done, because in that
100%.
moment you're probably really angry about this thing that the coworker did, or this thing with my husband or partner or whatever it may be. But it is amazing when people can start to have that ability to step back and just notice that, wow, those things come up and they always coincide with these other things that are happening.
Hmm.
And this
Definitely.
isn't necessarily about my body per se. It's actually about when I feel more lonely or upset or disappointed or whatever these other emotions are.
100%. Totally agree. And it's some of the hardest work I think we'll ever do as humans, but it's some of the most rewarding work because, when you start with a client, you ask them, how many hours a day are you thinking about your body or food or calories or weight or what your body looks like or, all of these things. And then through your work together, the goal is it's not going to be never, like you said, you're still going to have thoughts. We can't control them. But the goal is to be able to live our life and do things that we love and that we genuinely enjoy without these obsessive thoughts about food and what our body looks like stealing the
Yeah.
present from us.
Yeah.
And that's what's so interesting is like the body doesn't have to physically change in order to get to that place, right?
Yes.
Or in order, and it doesn't even have to be that place. It could just be not having as many thoughts, right? Is like a first step. So, and I think it comes back to as well, like the expectations piece we keep coming back to today of, I think social media is a wonderful tool and it can also stir up a lot of negative things. But I think sometimes there's this false expectation of like, I need to love my body. I need to love every roll, every crease. I
Yeah.
very rarely work if ever have ever met a human that wakes up every morning and looks in the mirror and says, I love my body.
Yeah,
If you do, great, more power to you. But can we level set our expectations to be, hey, I just want to accept my body and not think about it as much.
yeah,
Or I just want it to be neutral. I don't want to love it. I don't want to hate it. I just want it to be there and again be able to focus on other things that I'm passionate about and not have it take up all of my mental bandwidth throughout the
for
day.
sure. For sure.
Yeah.
And I think the thing I would also add to this is when someone imagines that person who has the good relationship with their body, who isn't thinking about 24/7, they often think of this stereotype of, oh, well, they
Yep.
must have all of these privileges. And sometimes that
Yep.
is true, but I've
Hmm.
worked with people all across the weight spectrum who
Yep.
have had horrendous body image, and I've worked with people across the weight spectrum who've got to a place where they have really good body image. And
100%.
so it's not like you've said many times, it's not that there isn't weight stigma and bias and all of these things in our society. Those things truly do exist and they do make it more difficult for some people than others.
Hmm.
And that is not a complete embargo into someone being able to get to a place where they do have good body image and there is body
Yes.
acceptance and there is body neutrality or body autonomy or body respect, all of these things where, hey, I don't have to love every part of my body, but you know what? I'm going to take care of it and I'm going to speak to it in a kind and compassionate way. Not always,
Yes.
but the vast majority of the time.
Yes. And I feel like a lot of people have experienced some form of this, of like, if they did at some point reside in a smaller version of themselves, right? And you'll have them pull up a picture and it'll be like, okay, what was your narrative like in your head then? And they're like, oh, I still hated my body, right?
Yeah,
Especially the people that I've worked with that have dieted for 20 plus years. They look at that picture and they're like, oh, I wish I looked like that. But what was your narrative? Oh, I hated my body. So what makes us think that if we get into a smaller body now, that we're just gonna poof, love ourselves, right? And we can't hate our way to happiness. And that's what it's just the diet culture narrative being thrown in our face over and over again to make us believe that if we just get smaller, we'll be happier. And you could use that narrative for anything in life, right? If I just get the partner, if I just get the job, if I just get the raise, if I just get enter anything, then I'll be happy.
yeah.
And that's just, it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels true because things are relative. And when you're living in that
Yes.
bigger body and then you reflect back on that smaller body, you're like, my God, like, of course I would be so, so happy to get back there. But if you then
Yeah.
get back there, what happens is that's now, okay, that's the new normal. And now I'm comparing myself to this other thing or this other thing, or I'm
Yep.
recognizing, man, am I having to do a lot to maintain this thing? And I thought
Yep.
that I would be just so confident and I would love going out to meals and I'd love doing this in that body. And yet I'm not actually noticing that that's occurring. And so even if I've got the
Yep.
quote unquote body of my dreams and that I thought would make me happy, and even if I can recognize that it is a good looking body by society standards, it doesn't actually translate in the way that I thought that it would.
Yes. And I think something that is pulled into this as well, right, is that external validation.
Yeah.
And that's something that is so often remembered when we think of the smaller version of ourselves or of bodies in general. Because if you've ever dieted and achieved a smaller body at some point or another, you probably had people saying to you, you look so good. Whatever you're
Yeah.
doing, keep it up. Oh, you look awesome. Yeah, girl. Like I have vivid memories of the summer I came back, my most disordered as ever, taking Adderall every day to try to not eat, and people just complimenting me out the ass. And what did that do? That just made me more disordered than ever because they were telling me that they loved in that moment my smaller body, right? In my head, that's what I told myself is like people like me more if I'm smaller. I get more attention if I'm smaller, and that fueled that didn't make me like myself more. That didn't
Yeah.
make me like my body more at all. It made me actually hate myself more and do more harmful behaviors than good.
Yeah. Yeah. And then now we tie all of my self-worth to this one thing,
100%.
as opposed to being like, no, they like me because I'm a really compassionate person and I'm a good
Yep.
listener or whatever it may be. Like this is the only reason people are wanting me around.
Yep.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. And I know you had an experience, I don't know how recently this was, but you had a family member ask you if you were pregnant. So I want you to
Yes.
talk about that and ask you when you're pregnant when you were not pregnant. So yeah, tell me
Correct.
about that experience and how you dealt with it and how you responded and what that was like.
Yes, and I will send you a full podcast episode breakdown on that. So if this has happened to any of your listeners and they want to go deeper into this, they can click that as well in the show notes. But yeah, I was, what was I, not even 6 months postpartum. But that just shows you how little this family member knew about me,
Yeah.
and how like distant we are. Because I ended up going to this wedding solo. My husband stayed home with our two kids, and because it was just easier, less expensive, all the things.
Yeah.
And yeah, my family member kind of like pulled me off the dance floor and was like, "Do you have something to tell me?" And I was like, "What?" And then they asked it again and kind of like up and down. I was like, and nothing was registering in my head. I'm like, "What?" And they're like, "Are you expecting?" And I was just like, like I was in that moment, just like could not believe. But then honestly, I couldn't believe it. There was anger. And then in my head, this is so fucked up. I was like, this is going to be a great podcast episode. Terrible that I thought that way, but whatever. Um, but I was like, in the moment, I was like, again, I needed to get out. Like there were sirens in my head being like, get out, get to safety. So I was just like, no, I just had a baby. And then I just kind of like danced away. Cause like I was on the dance floor. He pulled me off of the dance floor to ask me. So then I just like danced away.
Yeah.
And honestly, and I went over this in depth on my podcast, I was more angry at myself for how bad the comment hurt than I was at the comment in general. And when
Yeah.
I realized that, it just like made me really angry because I was like, even with the work that I do, right? Day in and day out with body image and all this stuff, it made me so angry that that comment then derailed pretty much the rest of my night that I couldn't be present. I couldn't shake it off. It just like pissed me off. I ended up texting my husband because I was like, what the fuck? And he was like, are you fucking kidding me? But like, it made me so angry that the it wasn't the comment that hurt me. It was how I was reacting to the comment. So I just let myself be angry. I kind of just had to like counsel myself in the moment of like, feel whatever you need to feel.
Yeah.
You know that this just speaks volumes of how he views bodies and thinks it's okay to ask a woman that and all of these things. Um, and then, I just let myself process um, and acknowledge that like that sucked.
Yeah.
That hurt. That stirred up some old part of me that did tie worth to my body and body size.
Yeah.
But then I was able to move on to it from it so much quicker and recognize that it didn't spiral me into any harmful behaviors
Yeah.
like whatsoever. I continued to eat normally, everything normal. Like there was no like, oh, now I need to change my body. It was more so me texting this person to say, well, now you know to never ask a woman that ever again. And I'm glad I could teach you that lesson.
Sure. And I think the thing with this, and this will be the true for anyone listening or going through a similar experience, is you don't choose that first response. Like it's not that
Yes.
you heard that comment and you're like, body, get angry. Like it just did
Yeah.
what it did. And as you say, this probably connects to an old wound or stuff that is just deep within us. Like we all want
Mhm.
to be loved. We all want to be not ostracized and be the outsider. And for whatever reason, that comment got seen as a threat and triggered something within you. And
Yeah.
I think what's more important is what is the thing that you're doing after that? So you reach out to your
Yes.
husband, okay, I need to allow this anger to be here. I'm going to give myself the space to feel these things, and I'm not then going to start doing any disordered behaviors, or I'm not going to do anything that is then going to add fuel to this fire or make things worse. I think that's the more important piece.
Yes. Yes. Just allowing myself to feel it, getting that support. Like you said, reaching out to a supportive loved one. I was also so fortunate that earlier that night, I ran into a girl in the bathroom who was like, "Are you Sam from Fine Food Freedom?" And I was like, "I am." And she was a dietitian from California. She was weight inclusive. I was like, "No fucking way." I was like, "Why didn't I know you were going to be here? Like, why didn't they tell me this?" And so then I found her when the comment was made. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I have to tell you about this." So that was just like an angel being sent from whatever powers above to tell
Yeah.
me like, hey, you can go confide in her. So that was a fun little moment we had together. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
and you just again, that's where though for so many people on their journeys of recovery, like you said, you don't get to control how you react, but you also never get to control what people say to you, right?
Yeah.
And so these experiences, as much as they may suck, they prove and give you evidence of how far you've come. Because again, if that was said to me in my 20s, I would have been starting a juice cleanse by that evening, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But so it allows you to see how differently you react and fall back to self-compassion
Yeah.
and not the harmful behaviors. And so there's a part of me that's like not happy that it happened, but like it's really cool to see that growth personally. And then again, there's that professional side of my brain that's like, all right, this is a great story and we can use it as content to help other people. Because when I put up an Instagram poll, I think there had to be thousands and thousands of women that were like, this happened to me this week.
Yeah.
This happened to me 3 times and I've never had a child. Like, because I was postpartum. I had diastasis recti. I had a C-section. So there was a look to my body that I can understand that. And
Yeah.
going back to what we've talked about before, this happens to humans all the time who have never birthed a child.
Yeah.
And again, back to that discrimination, oppression, fat shaming, judgment that people get in larger bodies. That is just appalling.
Yeah, for sure. When I saw your post about it on Instagram, one of the one of the comments, and I think it's from, he said they said it's from a comedian, which is like, unless a woman is crowning, don't ask if she's pregnant. And I was like, I think that's a lovely idea that everyone should keep in mind.
Yes, I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah. Cool, Sam. This has been wonderful. I've loved getting to chat with you. I feel like we could go on for many more hours, but
We truly could.
where should people go if they want to find out more about you?
Yeah, probably the easiest place would be Instagram because all of our links live there. So you can find us on Instagram at find.food.freedom. And if you click the link in our bio there, you can get your benefits checked. So if you live in the United States, we accept Aetna, Cigna, United, BCBS, many more. And the majority of people have free one-on-one counseling with our team, and they have no idea that they have these benefits. So highly encourage people to come on over to Instagram and check us out.
Okay, cool. Well, I will put all of those links in the show notes. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. This is awesome.
Thank you.
So that was my conversation with Sam Previte. I really loved what we got to cover here. If you like what we cover, then I highly recommend checking out her other podcasts, checking out her Instagram. I will put all of those links in the show notes. As I mentioned at the top, I'm currently taking on new clients. If you're living with an eating disorder and you would like to reach a place of full recovery, then I would love to help. Just send an email to info@7-health.com and just put coaching in the subject line, and then I can get the details over to you. All right, well, that is it for this week's show. I will be back with another episode next week. Until then, take care of yourself, and I will see you soon.